Hare Krishna, Nam Sankirtan Yagya ki
Jai!
Hare Krishna Mahamantra ki
Jai!
Dhamuridhar Gaurachandra Bhagavan ki
Jai!
Shiromani Bhakta Pralad ki
Jai!
Bhagavan ki
Jai!
Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki
Jai!
Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai!
Gaur Premanande
Thank you all so much for being here today for Bhagavata. And unfortunately, as I think everyone has heard, His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj will not be able to join us to give us the Bhagavata class today, but he will be back very soon in June, and Krishna willing, we'll give a public program when he returns. And we are very fortunate because His Grace Yogesvara Prabhu has graced us with his presence today at Bhakti Center and has kindly agreed to give the Bhagavata class. So let's please say Hari Bol. Welcome His Grace Yogesvara Prabhu to Bhakti Center. He was initiated by Srila Prabhupada in 1969. And after 13 years of living in temples of Europe and America, he returned to New York. He is an adjunct professor of religious studies at Hofstra University. And he used to teach actually weekly classes at Jivamurti Yoga Studio here in New York City. And it's actually the reason why I came to Krishna consciousness. And continues to teach regular classes in New York and elsewhere. And he has made documentaries about the Holocaust, which have aired on PBS and Discovery, and has written many incredible books, including Here Comes the Sun, The Spiritual Musical Journey of George Harrison, and Key to Wisdom, an Introduction to India's Essential Yoga Text. So he's going to speak to us today on consciousness, and thank you so much for being here.
Good morning. Welcome to the Bhakti Center, the only Krishna temple in the world where you can give a class in Muslims. You were expecting Radhanath Swami, and I'm afraid all you get is me, so you'll have to make do with that. Just to briefly introduce myself, as you heard, I was initiated in 1969. I'm 73 years old now. I was 20 back then, so the jokes just gotten really bad. Back then, in those early days, there were so few devotees that we kind of knew everybody. It was very family-oriented. And I remember those days in London with much fondness. I don't think I understood anything about the philosophy, but I remember those three devotee couples who had come from San Francisco, and I remember them with great fondness. They were affectionate and warm and welcoming, and I just knew, whatever these people are into, I want this company in my life. So that's kind of, I think, at the heart of the bhakti culture. We can talk all the philosophy we want. Philosophy doesn't make anyone a devotee. What brings someone to Krishna's lotus feet is the company of caring, compassionate, loving devotees. So thank you for allowing me to be in this caring, loving, compassionate company this morning. This is a little spontaneous. I wasn't expecting to be giving a talk this morning. I'll do my best. It happens that last night I attended a program by my brother. My brother's a very well-known physicist. His name is Brian Greene, and his field is string theory physics. And every year at this time, he has something called the World Science Festival. I think it's about the 18th or 19th year that it's taking place. Last night, there was a panel discussion at John Jay College Auditorium over on 59th Street that featured some of the leading voices in consciousness studies. David Chalmers was there and others. Chalmers is an interesting guy. He actually entered into the field of consciousness studies 20 some odd years back when he was invited to give a paper at a Bhaktivedanta Institute conference in San Francisco. And now he's kind of ascended the ranks in the world of consciousness studies. I'm quite interested in consciousness studies. I'm on the board of the Bhaktivedanta Institute. The reason I'm interested in consciousness studies is that I believe that our responsibility, those of us who are committed to a life of devotion and the Gaudiya Vaishnava culture, our obligation is to evolve a vernacular, to uncover a vocabulary that will articulate the core beliefs and premises of our culture to a contemporary audience. The same truths can be expressed in different words, and if the words are not intelligently chosen, you can turn someone off. The same concept, articulated wisely and carefully, can be very appealing. His Holiness Srila Bodhayan Maharaj spoke at Washington Square Park this past, was this yesterday?
2 days ago.
Yeah, 2 days ago. And he told this wonderful story about His Divine Grace Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada, that when he was speaking with people, he was able to adapt the presentation according to their specialty. So if his guest was a mathematician, he would connect the dots between mathematics and the Vedic perspective. If they were a cosmologist, a geologist, a neurologist, whatever their particular field was, he was so intellectually astute that he could articulate the same idea in these many different languages. I think that's our responsibility today. Whatever your particular expertise, whatever your particular field of activity and interest, look for the points of tangency. Look for the language with which to express what you know in a way that those around you, your particular sphere of influence, the community around you, will find attractive and interesting. So it's not so much a matter of mastering many verses and having a profound knowledge of the text. Whatever knowledge you have, to be able to convey that in a manner that's effective to other people, that's, I think, our role today. So I'd like to talk briefly with you about some of the things that I heard last night at this consciousness conference, because it really goes to the heart of the teachings of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, the works of the Goswamis. The foundational principle, the fundamental principle of what we call Krishna consciousness is really rather simple. It's that everything that lives, whether it's a human being or a flower or a mosquito or an animal or whatever it is that we say is alive, that is a spark of transcendent energy. It is not the product of matter. In its original state, that divine spark is four things: Sat, Chit, Ananda, and Vigraha. Sat means eternal. Chit means fully self-aware, full of knowledge. Ananda means by nature joyful, blissful. And Vigraha means endowed with form, individuality, personality. We pray to our spiritual master Srila Prabhupada, Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nitya Namini, and then we immediately follow it up with the following: Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavad Paschatya Deshatarine. Paschatya means us, Western kind of derelicts. And the Nirvishesh Shunyavad perspectives can, in a sense, at least my theory is that it can be translated into the goals of most physical science. Physical science attempts to strip away the transcendent from life and describe the experience of consciousness as something that is an emergent quality of matter, meaning that at some moment in cosmic history, in evolutionary history, in biological history, through the combination of subatomic particles, wave functions, cosmic energies, quantum fields, and so on, there is a generation of self-awareness. In other words, if you follow the physics down far enough in the brain, you come to a point where the brain becomes self-aware. Now, from a certain approach, that is actually defensible. It's not that it's wrong. I remember a discussion with Srila Prabhupada in Paris where someone was talking about, this was in his quarters there, they're saying how this religion and that point of view, you know, they're all wrong. And Prabhupada shook his head and said, not wrong, incomplete. Very important distinction. Radhanath Swami and I had the pleasure of talking with him at Washington Square Park, and he reminded me of, I believe he was quoting Rupa Goswami, that a pure devotee is one who doesn't have the time to fault find with others. And there's something, I think, critical there. On occasion, I think we, well, at least those of us from the first generation, we get a little head up with our own certitude over Krishna consciousness. It's our way or the highway, right? The world just has to listen to what we have to say, and if they follow our direction, everything's going to be fine. And you know, that's in ancient Greece that was called hubris. It was the kind of pride that brought down the wrath of the gods. It's taken us a long time to recognize that we're not being called upon to imitate the acharyas. We're called upon to follow in their footsteps. It's a very different thing. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Goswami Maharaj had the right to be strong because he was a direct conduit of God in the world. Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktivedanta Swami had the right to be that strong person he was because he was also that pure self who was a conduit of God in the world. We can't claim that. That's not a prerogative that we have. So there's an attitude here, and it's that attitude that I want to speak about in the context of consciousness. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean the following. The same scientific data that I was hearing last night at the World Science Festival that is extraordinarily convincing with respect to consciousness as an emergent quality of matter. The same data seen by someone with a particular kind of psychological background, a certain kind of psychic background, a certain kind of rational way of looking at things, will be very convincing, and they'll be willing to cross this line. What is that line? The line is we have the tools now for understanding the phenomenon of nature from within the world of matter. It's just a question of time. When artificial intelligence evolves sufficiently that we can imitate the functioning of the brain, and you would be amazed at how quickly that's happening, by the way. Absolutely breathtaking how fast that can, that's a game changer right there. What's happening in the world of artificial intelligence would just blow you away. I mean, it's happening so fast now. The acceleration of evolving systems within AI are quite startling and quite distressing, actually. The idea of that kind of power in the hands of unevolved people is a little distressing. But the same information can be seen by someone. Let me give you an example. If a scientist grew up in a family where they were exposed to abuse, where power was something to be feared, the idea of some power beyond matter, something that we can control, could be absolutely terrifying. And no matter how much doubt there may be over the certitude or the completeness of this data, it's just a matter of time. There is absolutely no need for that person, from that person's perspective, to go outside the realm of the perceivable universe, what we can quantify and track with the tools of our intellect and observation, tools of observation. Someone else, perhaps someone who grew up in a faithful family, whose parents were loving and supportive and encouraged curiosity and a willingness to explore and kind of be all that you want to be in life, may have a very different approach. They may not at all feel intimidated by the idea that, there's something else going on. There's something else that we cannot explain. And it's looking like we're not going to be able to understand life just through our analysis of inert matter. So there is a psychological dimension to the study of consciousness, and I think that's critically important. The bottom line is that we have this very simple idea. All life, we say, is a spark of the divine, originally in this beautiful, pristine state of fullness and completeness. What a wonderful way to wake up in the morning, isn't it? Knowing that you now, in this moment, you are full and complete. You lack nothing. You are a spark of God. There's no need to live with fear. There's no need to live with shame. There's no need to live with any sense of unworthiness or incompleteness. You are a child of God. What an amazing, that's a nice way to start the day, isn't it? Somehow, because we reflect God's qualities in small quantity, we also have a degree of God's independence. That means we can decide how we want to go in our lives, what we're going to do. How you spend your day is how you spend your life. Some souls, for reasons that we don't quite understand, some sparks of Krishna, choose to move away from that original environment and exercise their independence in a different way. In other words, instead of wondering what it's like to be with God, they begin to wonder, I wonder what it's like to be God. That's the material universe. The world around you, the world that we perceive, is a gift from God. It's a cherished gift. It's a playground where errant souls have the opportunity to act out their fantasies of independence. And eventually they will come to the point of realizing that there's nothing here that satisfies me. And at that moment, that's described in the Vedanta Sutra, Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Ta means now. Now, therefore. Now, therefore, what? Now for what? Now that you've tried your best to be happy in this world, and it ain't working. Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Now is the time to inquire. When that inquiry is sincere, then the guru comes. The guru is another gift. We're surrounded by gifts. The company of devotees is a gift. The darshan of the beautiful Radha Muralidhar or Chaitanya Devas is a gift. Prasadam is a gift. The holy names are a gift. The guru is a gift. It's Christmas every day for us here. And at that point, the connection is, the spark is rekindled. And through diligent practice and reform of behavior, we again revive what we have forgotten. So it's basically just remembering what's already there. Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada, from the very early days used to say, is not an artificial imposition on the mind. It is the original state of all living beings. So that makes sense to people who have an openness of mind to consider that beautiful picture that I just painted for you of what it means to be a divine spark. Not everyone's ready to do that. It's very intimidating. Look at the history here. Religion has not done a particularly good job over the course of history representing God in the world. Religion has come to represent for many people everything that is bad, everything that is negative, everything that is most humiliating and tragic about human nature. Because it's manipulated, it's been used to control, it has not been used to liberate. So anything that smacks of religion is immediately anathema. Last night at the panel discussion, there was maybe a moment or two when any of the panelists allowed himself or herself to reference this idea that there's something more that in the olden days we used to call the soul. He can't even say the word anymore. The word itself causes repercussions of disgust. You know? And then it was immediately dismissed. Why is that? Well, if you're a rational thinking person and you have an interest in knowing what is this world and how does it work, how does it operate, going about a reasonable, intellectually rigorous analysis of how things work, that makes perfect sense. That line that crosses over into what my mother used to affectionately call woo-woo land. You know, when I first got involved, she's into weed or woo-woo. She got over that. That's okay. Means you're opening the door to every crystal ball gazing, spirit channeling, you know, wackadoodle to come down the pike. Tragically, for a long time, anyone wearing robes and had a shaved head or wearing a sari and tilak was kind of grouped over in that category. It's taken a long time for us to overcome that kind of social stigma, but it's happening. It's happening because there's been the time now, after, 60 some odd years, 70 years, to deepen our appreciation of the texts and the philosophy and the teachings. And the deeper you go inside these teachings, the more exciting and fulfilling it becomes. It's absolutely joyful to study these texts in the context of the world we live in. And that's what I thought I would talk to you about here. There are different theories of consciousness that are in vogue currently in science. One of them is called IIT, Integrated Information Theory. IIT essentially says that consciousness is a function of how much information is in a particular system. A rock doesn't have too much information. An animal has a greater degree of information. A human has a huge degree of information. And consciousness is a function of the amount of integrated information incorporated into that particular system. So it's there, it's pervasive, but it's a function of how much information is involved. We can talk about the pluses and minuses of these different theories if you're interested, but I'm just kind of giving you a general overview here. Another perspective is called panpsychism. Panpsychism, in a sense, says that in consciousness is one of the elements of the basic model of creation. It's there, just like gravity is there, and time, and spin, and particle momentum. It's another element of creation, and it's there in everything. Okay, another perspective. There's something called the global workshop. Global workspace, which is the idea that the brain receives information from different inputs, linguistic, visual, auditory, and so on. And there's a hub where all of this information is processed. And in this hub, you have the determination of what to do with that information. And that volition of what to do with the aggregate of information that we receive is being called in some schools consciousness. In other words, what's happening in physics today is there's a conflating of terminology. Consciousness, the mind, information, awareness, all of these different terms are kind of being given a scientific equivalence in the field of consciousness studies. What's happening at the Bhaktivedanta Institute currently, and this is very exciting, is that there is a growing program for training science literacy, how to process the information that we're getting from science in such a way that you don't make that mistake of falling into the assumption that because we've understood this much, therefore, given time, given sufficient development of these cognitive functions that we're seeing in silicon chip substitutes for neurons in the brain, and at some point we'll be able to evolve consciousness. How to recognize where that line is and not cross over it inadvertently. So that's an important function of the Bhaktivedanta Institute. Why does this have any relevance to us here today? Well, I remember as a lad of 19, joining the temple in London back in those wild, wacky days when we were recording with the Beatles at Apple Studios. That's me, by the way, my big claim to fame. If you've heard the Radha Krishna Temple album, I'm singing on that. Never mind the degrees in the books and all that stuff. He sang with George Harrison. Oh. That did, yeah, that's cool. But going back to those early days, I wish I had had an older, more balanced impression of how to integrate Krishna consciousness into my life. Remember, I was born in 1950, right? I grew up in the 60s. Right? There was no reasonable approach to anything back then. Right? You know, I was a student in Paris at the Sorbonne, was studying literature. When I met devotees, went to London. I could have said, this is interesting. I think I'd like to learn more about this while I'm finishing my college degree. Nah. Full immersion. 2 days later, I had a shaved head. I was out on Oxford Street. Harinam Sankirtan. Now, do I regret it? No, not really. Because it was exciting and it was very rewarding. I mean, you know, it was either going back, we're studying, you know, Stendhal at the Sorbonne or recording with George Harrison at Apple Studios. No contest, right? But over the course of time, when that initial euphoria over this is described actually by Rupa Goswami in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. He says the first thing that happens when you chant, is this immediate sense of relief, this, oh, wow, I'm not the sum total of all the traumas of my life. I'm something more than that. I'm something beautiful and wonderful. That's just the beginning, mind you. But that sense of, of contentment is so powerful that you want more of it. In those days, there wasn't, a sense of, let's do this in a reasoned way. You were in or you were out. So just as a word of encouragement to all of you, as you develop your spiritual life, try to keep a level head about you. Sure, should you be pursuing your eternal self? Absolutely. But don't do it to the harm of your parents or your friends or your family. Try to keep them in mind. They love you and they depend on you and they wish you well and they haven't a clue what the hell you're doing. And it scares the Jesus out of them. What happened to Mary? She used to be so normal. So try to, find that level ground that's a good balance for yourself between your spiritual practices and the rest of your life. You have a life. That's also a gift from God. Don't reject it. Make the most of the gifts that you can get. So I don't want to talk too much here. I think I've given you a taste, at least, of a flavor of what's happening in the field of consciousness studies. It's a very dramatic time right now with the evolution of AI, and we'll see what comes next there. But perhaps, if anything, it's a clarion call. It's a wake-up call that our tools, our technology is far outstripping our emotional, intellectual, and spiritual development. And that's where the danger lies. If we don't learn how to control ourselves, manage properly this immense power that's being unleashed by these machines, it could lead to absolutely devastating consequences. So there's a real world application of Krishna consciousness here. A real serious, right now, immediate value and purpose to what we're doing. Many of you may be here because this is your family religion. This is what my parents did, my grandparents did, and that's wonderful. Know that you are here not just for that. There is this other dimension now. There's a dimension of becoming yourself an agent for transmission of this knowledge in the world. And I believe that there's no accident in our being here today. I think we're here for that purpose. We're here to acknowledge one another as being on this very exciting, challenging mission of injecting a sense of balance into the world around us by presenting the immense treasure of the Vedic texts, teachings, in a way that people will understand and appreciate. So thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Yes. What's your name?
My name is Ramchandra Das.
Ramchandra Das?
Chandra Das.
Very nice to meet you.
Thank you very much for the amazing class. When you were speaking, my question is, when you were speaking about how your brother is a physicist. So whether it is physics or many other streams of science, typically when they come up with a theory or hypothesis, often with some mathematical basis, if they come up with a theory, the theory only becomes confirmed after you validate it. So my question to you is, validate through either experiments or so on. So my question to you is, when you speak that there are so many different theories like IIT and two other theories that you mentioned about information consumption or what to do. My question is, when people come up with this, researchers come up with these kind of hypotheses, how do they validate and at what kind of validation do the scientific circle do they accept it?
Well, because I'm not a scientist myself, I can't give you a detailed answer to your question. Those in the back, did you hear the question? Basically, how do they validate these theories of consciousness? That is what you're asking. with the evolution of more and more refined tools of observation, particularly in fields of electron microscopes, and now with, there are quantum computers coming online, and there are all kinds of very, very powerful ways of processing huge amounts of data very quickly. Things that were never possible before. Experiments are possible now that test some of these theories in terms of what happens when neurons fire in the brain. I mean, there's someone I was with last night who works in the field of neuroscience who was describing that we can, is Ross here by the way? No. Within 3 seconds, we can visualize on a computer screen when the brain is having a particular kind of function or an idea. Within 3 seconds, we can see it materializing on a screen. So that time's going to get faster and faster and shorter to a point where, in theory, it will look like we're able to mimic the operations of the brain. So at that point, these different theories of, is there a global workspace where different inputs are agglomerated and then output in a way that translates into movement, into I'm seeing the color red now, or I'm hearing my own voice, or I'm feeling myself pinch my hand. Where are those sensations originating in the brain? Right? So that's what science is attempting to do, and what it defines as consciousness. Consciousness, if you think of it in terms of the irreducible, intimate, personal experience of being alive. I know I'm here. I don't need you to tell me that. I don't need to read it in a book. I know I'm alive. And now I'm experiencing things. I have emotions. I react to things in my own very unique way. That's consciousness. In Gaudiya Vaishnav terminology, we would say that that's not the self, that consciousness is a symptom of the self. And that's another issue here, is that what science is doing is conflating consciousness with the source of consciousness. And that's an issue I think that we also can make a contribution toward right there. Consciousness, Prabhupada once described as being like, if you're in a room and you're facing this way and behind you there's a fireplace, and you're feeling heat, and you're seeing the reflection of light, you know there's a fire there. You know it by its symptoms. Or to use perhaps another example, we've never seen an electron, but if you project an electron with an electron gun through a liquid medium, liquid helium or whatever, you see the bubbles that it leaves behind it, like an airplane that leaves a stream of jet fumes behind it. You don't see the plane, but you see those fumes. So by its symptoms, we know that there is a source of consciousness there. Consciousness is the indicator of the self. So what you're asking about is the state of science today, and I'm only able to give you a very layman's perspective on it, but it's evolving fast.
Thank you. Because pretty detailed.
For whom?
I believe that the Srila Prabhupada put down the ascending method of receiving knowledge to be speculation. The basis of that is because he was presenting knowledge from a descending source in an empowered way that he was able to say, I'm here. I'm representing God in completeness, as you see.
Yes.
As you see.
Yes, thank you. That's very true. What Prabhu is referring to are the pramanas, different ways of knowing things, different forms of etymological inquiry. So we have the pramana of direct observation, empiric evidence. We have the pramana of deduction, the power of reasoning. Then there is Shruti pramana. We have the power of knowledge that comes from a non-material source, that comes from outside the realm of our perceptions. Different ways of knowing things. What's interesting, our godbrother Radhika Ramana gave a very interesting talk about this. where he described that actually Shruti Praman depends on the other pramans as well. You can't say that because I've heard this from a descending source, therefore I've realized it. You understand it through the tools of intellect, through the tools of observation, through the tools of how do I now apply this. Other forms of knowledge are critically needed in order to avoid fanaticism. Just to say I believe it because it's in scripture, well, that's what leads to all kinds of chaos. So it may be true, but it needs to be balanced with the other pramanas. It's like three legs of a tripod, it supports itself. So we don't dismiss the other forms of accumulating knowledge. We say that all three are needed. But thank you for bringing that up. It's very, very good.
I have another question. It may be a bit tricky.
Well, why stop now?
Yeah. So you had mentioned that this AI is coming across us at such speed that it's like unbelievable, and it could be very dangerous if it falls into the hands of, I repeat the words, unevolved persons. So would you be able to indicate who you think these unevolved persons are?
Have you read a newspaper?
Would it be the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, I'd rather not get dragged too deeply into the weeds of politics if you don't mind. But sure, I mean, look, we're confronting wars that are being waged with drone warfare. Right? We're confronting biological warfare. We're confronting a so-called civilization where people continue to subjugate and oppress other people with all kinds of sophisticated tools. The tool itself is neutral. AI is neutral, like a knife is neutral. But a knife in the hands of a murderer is different from the knife in the hands of a surgeon. So these scientific tools of superconductive computation are like that. They're neutral in and of themselves. Depending on the motivation of the people manipulating those tools, they can be used for good or for evil. Yes, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Quick question. Have you ever reflected upon the field of application of AI on spirituality for the Krishna consciousness movement? What can we do with that?
What can we do with AI? Well, it's kind of a sensitive issue because I'm of the persuasion that we're way behind the eight ball when it comes to our presence in media. I don't think we've actually we've barely scratched the surface of how to present, this majestic culture, in contemporary media forms. I don't see it. I'm not seeing it out there. We have a few videos, some people are trying to make, animated Ramayanas or whatever. We're not there. And the challenge is not so much the technology. The challenge is evolving a depth of realization that will allow us to engage these tools in an effective way. I don't know about you, but I have to confess that from time to time I watch a movie. I do. I am a recovering movie watcher. And, some of the effects are absolutely extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. It began in 1993, actually, with Spielberg's Jurassic Park. That was the first time that reality took a turn. the world shifted on its axis. For the first time, there were photoreal, believable dinosaurs on the screen. Up until that moment, a photograph was considered conclusive evidence. You could bring it up in court, and there it is. There's the visual evidence of the crime. That's out the window now. Anything can be simulated. Anything can be manipulated. So, have I thought about it? Yeah, a day doesn't go by when I don't think about what we could do. You know, the illustrating of concepts from the Satsandarbha, you know, the illustrating of concepts from Bhagavad Gita, the idea of taking consciousness, for example, and looking at a tripartite model, which is our model. Our model is variously Paramat, you know, Brahman, Paramatma, Bhagavan, that's one tripartite model. Another tripartite model is the physical self, the mental self, and the transcendent self. So, I mean, the notion of being able to give some visual dimension to that's very exciting. I don't think it's been done. I've not seen anything particularly impressive. So, we're a ways off still. And what I have seen is very naive. It's not particularly attractive. We'll get there someday.
One more thing. I do not know if you know Premanava Prabhu personally, but he had told me, he's left his body since then. He had told me once when I was living with him in a cabin somewhere in Vrindavan, that Prabhupada told him that one day devotees will be able to engage whatever technology there is and use it in Krishna's service. When he told me that, I thought, wow, we are a far distance from reaching that point, exactly as you
Yeah,
said.
absolutely. I mean, with all due respect, it was His Holiness Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, who was really the pioneer of engaging technology in Krishna service. He was the first. His father also had a car, but it was Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati who really showed that there are no limits here. And sure, I mean, nothing is outside the scope of devotional service. Nothing. Absolutely everything in creation is within the realm of devotional service. Our challenge is to become mature enough and wise enough to know how to recognize its utility. So that work still lies ahead.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. The question is a little weird. You were explaining one of the point that when someone explains Vedic culture, Vedic scriptures, and you hear it and you just accept it, that is not realization. But the thing is also, if no one explains or tells us the Vedic scriptures, we will not realize. So my doubt is, will you be able to reflect a little bit more on where to distinguish or where to draw the line that we have heard the Vedic scriptures, we do not just blindly accept, and how
Right.
self-realization.
So there's rote knowledge, memorizing a verse, and then there's realized knowledge, Gyan and Vigyan, you might say. Realized knowledge is when you are so well versed in the many dimensions of a particular field of knowledge that you are able to properly apply that knowledge in real-world practices. So that takes some effort and that takes some time. But let me not give a misimpression here. If you're studying verses, that's a purifying activity. That's not a waste of time. When you chant, please hear me out on this. This is so important. Chanting is itself God. Nama Chintamani Krishna's Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha Purna Shuddho Nityamukto Pinatvam Nama Namino. In the transcendent realm, there's no difference between the object and the sound representing that object. When you say Krishna, Krishna is dancing on your tongue, is the way Prabhupada used to describe it, right? So, but you can go on chanting for years and not feel anything. I've known in my career in Krishna consciousness, right? So you do the math. I was 19 when I went into the London Temple. I'm 73, so whatever that means. However many, I've seen a lot of people, big devotees, you know, they knew the texts and, you know, they kirtan. Where are they? Where did they go? What happened? I know people to this day who have addictions, sadly. And they've been in Krishna consciousness for a very long time. But they're addicted either to gross addictions like drugs or sex or social media. You know, they can't get off that damn phone. That's an addiction. Right? Then there are subtler kinds of addiction. I know one devotee is addicted to sarcasm. He can't resist putting other people down, you know? And it's hurting his spiritual life. I wish there was something to help him. I know a devotee who's addicted to bad jokes. You laugh, but you have to live with it for the last 50 years like I have. My point is, you have to bring yourself to your chanting. There's a qualitative difference between mechanical chanting and chanting from the heart. My gosh, what a privilege to be allowed to chant the holy names. What an utter privilege. And we sometimes, I think, forget. You know, it's a chore, something we have to get through. Instead of realizing, I'm so honored to be in the presence of the holy names. I know devotees in India, before they chant, they take their beads, they touch them to their forehead, you know, and they cover them with a cloth. They don't let other people watch them chanting on the beads. It's such an intimate, loving experience. So, chant with everything you've got. And you'll see the difference.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. So, you gave a glimpse about how to, like, there should be a balance between your life, spiritual life and material life, like with your family, your parents. But we know that there need to be people in all the ashrams. Even if you take the rest ashram, eventually, as per scriptures, you should go to one person. And it gets very tough. Majority of the times, parents or family is not ready for it, no matter how hard you try. So when is the time when you have to, when you know that I have to take a call and I should take a call, which will of course upset the family, but you have to do it. So the balance will go off, of course, but you still have to do it. When is the, like, how do you feel that you have to take that?
That's a trick question. I'll tell you a story instead of trying to answer your question. I was with Srila Prabhupada in Paris in 1973. Yeah. And on Harinam in the streets of Paris, a woman came up to us, a very famous woman actually. Her name was Regine. She passed away about 4 years ago. Regine was a very famous nightclub impresario. She had come out of the war years and earned her money, I think, in fashion, and then used the money to open up nightclubs. Her latest nightclub in 1973 was called New Jimmy. That's a strange name, New Jimmy. And when we met her, she said, "Oh, I'm a friend of George Harrison. I want to do something for you. Let's have a soirée indienne let's have an evening of festivities. You bring your prasadam food and you're chanting, and we'll raise some money for you to build a temple. Okay, wonderful. So let's talk about it. Yes, you said, yes, come to see me at my club in Jimmy at midnight on Friday. You have to understand, imagine the scene here. Friday night, out in front of New Jimmy in Montparnasse, the limousines were lined up farther than you could see, with these old guys with their young, chippies on their arm, going into the club. The club dance floor was made of mirrors, and all the women were wearing miniskirts. So you got to get the image of, come meet me in New Jimmy's at midnight on Friday. So Prabhupada was there. I went up to him and I said, look, here's the situation. Someone knows George, and she wants to help us. What should we do? He actually smiled. He said, go fishing. Just don't get wet. I think that's about the best answer I can give you. Go fishing. Do what you gotta do. But don't get so close to that danger line that you risk alienating family and friends. You can trust your instincts. You don't need, some master plan here. Be sincere about it, be sensitive to the people around you. If it's an emergency, take the damn call. But if you don't have to, then respect that family time. It's really a common sense thing.
Thank you.
What's your name?
Parth.
What?
Parth.
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 Parth. Nice to meet you. Whatever your name is, it's nice to meet you. What's your question?
Thanks so much for a wonderful scientific Bhagavata class. Bro, I was wondering about the examples you gave about the recent scientific theory about consciousness. So these theories which appears to me is like the standard bottom top approach, but the Shastra talks about the soul. It's like a top bottom approach. Means the consciousness is something a center point of which is like a generator of the knowledge. It can generate by itself. But the theories are something which works upon the existing data. It's like static machine learning model. So my question is that how something the data which just comes in, for example, data in the 2D plane, how it can extend it to the 3D planes. If you have the vectors in the 2D plane, you can generate billions of vectors in the 2D planes, which the A model does. If we give thousands persons images, it can create images which is not existing, like the famous websites of this person that does not exist. These websites are there and they generate new people photos, which are not existing peoples. So if we give the data which is existing, so it can generate new data. But it can never generate the data which is out of the plane. So when the question is that how these, if we consider this hypothesis, if we never feed those data to the system, to this conscious model, how it is able to extend to how is it able to match the real conscious?
Well, be very careful here. I appreciate what you're saying. I think the more recent dimensions of Turing models are quite stunning. They're quite striking. And I mean, the Turing test, for those who may not be familiar with the Turing test, is essentially saying a machine that is so convincing that you would say, I'm talking with a person. That's basically the idea. That threshold was passed a few years ago. We're past that. That's no longer the barometer of consciousness at all. It's that far evolved where the billions of neuron connections in the brain theoretically, we can replicate that with silicon. We don't have it yet, but you can do the math now. You don't have to have the actual machine. You can do the math. And the math will show you what the outputs will be when you have that kind of quantitative data to work with. So it's, what I'm trying to do is caution against what I would call triumphal Krishna consciousness. Be cautious of this assumption of absoluteness in our knowledge that says that can't be right because this is right. Bear in mind that the universe, God's creation, is so multidimensional. It's capable of accommodating many different kinds of truths. Scientific truths are not wrong. They may be constantly evolving with new information. That's one of the great qualities of science, is that it has this self-corrective mechanism that it's willing to admit we had that wrong. Right? Newtonian universe. Okay, along comes quantum physics. We had it wrong. Right? We're willing to admit that. So it's not either or, right? And I think that's probably the message of the Bhaktivedanta Institute as well, is to move away from the mentality of saying, in order for me to be right, that has to be wrong. It's not the case. It's not necessarily so. And the healthier, more productive dialogue is to say, what an amazing result your work has achieved here. Let's look at this together, because here's some interesting additional perspectives that may enhance the work that's been done. Rather than being a negative energy against what's going on in the world, how can we complement what's going on in the world? Now people have something to appreciate. And maybe our contribution will be even more valuable. So that's a change of mentality, I think, that's happening across the boards in ISKCON and in the Vaishnava world. It's, it's not our way or the highway anymore. But thank you, good question. Yes?
Hare Krishna. Thank you. So my question is perhaps a subtle one. I'm wondering essentially how to reconcile pure devotee, someone who's a pure devotee from Bhagavata at the highest level of Krishna consciousness, perhaps making a mistake. We understand somebody at that level is so intimately tied with Krishna, it's essentially as if they're talking to the deity, have this very close relationship with him. But at the same time, we see, like, for example, in the Bhagavad Gita as it is, when it was first, the manuscript was first being worked on by, I believe it was Hayagriva Prabhu. Hayagriva Prabhu mentioned that perhaps some of the verbiage that was in there should be changed, because otherwise it could have an adverse effect. So I've been struggling trying to reconcile this, and that, we say that the books are written by Krishna, but then how could it also be that there's perhaps things in there that maybe should have been worded differently?
I understand what you're saying, but you make me very curious to know why you're saying it. What is the motive behind the question? What is it that's troubling you?
It's mostly, I suppose, a desire to fully understand what it means to be at that level, to be a pure devotee, on the highest level. I mean, I've been in the movement for about 10 years now, actually by grace of a program that you yourself started about 10 years ago. And I don't have any issue with faith in general. Very, I don't want to get too deep in my personal, obviously that's kind of where it would go in terms of my motivation behind the question. But I don't question Srila Prabhupada as somebody who is a devotee, founder of Mahabhagavata. It's more just how to reconcile that that fact, because when we hear the books are written by Krishna, but then there's all these pushes to edit the books, because perhaps they're not hitting properly and according to social commentary.
Right.
So how could we?
No, thanks for putting up with my question.
No.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you're raising this question in the context of a discussion about consciousness and evolving vocabularies. We're still learning how to articulate what we know in a way that people can rationalize. Well, there's a few things at work here. I don't think there's only one level of an answer to your question. There's the pragmatic level, which was that Prabhupada was not a native English speaker, and he asked us to help him with his books. He didn't do it all himself. He wanted someone else to do the editing and so on. He told me personally, I was in charge of the French publications. He said, do it right, And in French, you translate a phrase like Supreme Personality of Godhead. There's nothing like that in French. What does it mean? Supreme Personality of God, So, there's a lot of discussion about how to translate words. The word Atma in Sanskrit got 25 different meanings. It can mean the body, the soul, the mind, the senses, humanity, creativity. So, to edit is not a mechanical function. It means to know the mind of the writer. Not just the words, but the mind of the writer, the intentions of the writer. So effective editing is editing that may even, on occasion, change the language because the translator or the editor is so astutely in tune with the author that they have the prerogative of doing that because they understand the author's intentions. Of course, the best is if the author is there and you can ask. We don't have that privilege now. So that's on a very pragmatic level. On another level, I think, which is the one that you're aiming at, which is what do we mean by a pure devotee? Isn't a pure devotee someone who doesn't make mistakes? Right? That kind of, am I kind of getting it?
Basically, I understand the whole, you driving on the left side of the road versus the right side, understanding things like that. But in terms of preaching, what's best for preaching, do you think that?
Yeah, okay. So I asked Prabhupada this question, so I can give you an answer. I said, Prabhupada, what do we do? Yeah. We got your books, but we don't always have you. You're traveling all the time. So things come up and we don't know how to interpret them, what to do, what the action is. If you're not there to guide us, and we don't have the answer directly in your books, what should we do? He looked at me like, dummy, Use your brain. Your intelligence is another gift from God. So there isn't quite the mystery about when things need to be understood in terms of purity, for example. Use your common sense here. It's not as complicated as you might think. When we say that someone is faultless, pure devotee is faultless, it doesn't mean that they know how many hairs are on your head. That their intelligence is so broad, so all-inclusive, that, it becomes ludicrous. That's reductio ad absurdum. A pure soul knows everything necessary to bring you to Krishna. A pure soul knows everything necessary to do the needed service. Part of that service is to engage others, right? If a pure soul was pure in the sense I think you're hinting at, we'd be extraneous. There'd be nothing for us to do. So it doesn't mean that there isn't. A god brother of mine named Atreya Rishi sent Prabhupada a letter once. Atreya was a brilliant mind, brilliant, absolutely. He was head of one of the big accounting firms in Iran, I think, before the revolution, the overthrow of the Shah. He came to New York, and he was on the GBC for a while. This was early 70s or so. And they said, Prabhupada, I said, I can't deal with you. I can't deal with these people. You know, it's just like they make so many mistakes. Prabhupada's answer was very revealing. He wrote a letter saying, making a mistake is a quality of your personhood, and it's what makes you wonderful. And he gave the following examples. He says, even in the spiritual world, they make mistakes. In the spiritual world, Radharani is so distracted looking at Krishna that she puts her sari on upside down. Krishna is so distracted looking at Radharani, he tries to milk a bowl. Mistakes are there, but they're sublime. A mistake in the service of God is service to God. So, it's a pretty commonsensical thing. So you can go. Yes.
My question is regarding a reference. If we can get the point you mentioned that consciousness in Gaudiya Vaishnavism is kind of understood as the symptom that one experiences of the if there is a fire, then if we see the smoke, then we know that
Right.
there is a fire.
Consciousness is a symptom of life.
And then you said that in today's world we don't have to kind of go with a negative negative kind of think that this is my way or the highway. We have to kind of internally in the language of the today's world, we have to kind of blend our how we present our philosophy. So and the Bhaktivedanta Institute is working on that. So are there any kind of references we can get from Bhaktivedanta Institute or any research kind of which is happening, which has been published, which actually talks in the terms of today's
Sure.
language?
Yes. The BI is constantly publishing books and papers. I think some of the most insightful work was done by two early founders of the BI, Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj and Sariputta Prabhu. Their writings are particularly relevant and approachable. They're not so complex that you can get lost in the equations. So if you look for their work, Richard Thompson and Swarup Damodar Maharaj, that's a good starting point for you. And go on the website, BIHS.org, Bhaktivedanta Institute of Higher Studies. Lots of good publications, lectures.
Thank you.
Question here?
Hare Krishna, thank you for the class. My name is Poppy. It resonated a lot with me when you spoke about being mindful of our family because they love us. It resonated with me because I felt like there was a lot of lifestyle change even just coming into it. Even being born Hindu family, when I was actively and made an active conscious decision to follow the path, there were a lot of lost in terms of like family and friends. And I wanted to ask if you can speak more on how to navigate or what's the right approach to have that conversation. It is a difficult conversation to let them know, I cannot go out and drink with you, or, there's some changes, and those are important to me, if that makes sense.
Thank you for
Yeah.
your question. I find it fascinating. We can start off with very highfalutin topics of consciousness and AI, and boom, kind of like come right down to what am I going to do with my mom and dad? That's the reality of it, isn't it? We want to know. I hate my job. What am I going to do? Well, again, I don't think there's any blanket answer to you. Everyone is an individual. If I've learned anything about Krishna consciousness over the 15,000 years that I've been practicing, and I tell people all the time, don't exaggerate. It's not to generalize. Don't generalize. In Krishna consciousness, we have to particularize. There's no blanket anything. Well, there's certain basic principles, chanting or whatever. But there's even nuances within that. We were just talking about that. So when it comes to family relations, I don't think there's any one way, other than compassion. You start with a quality of, I love this person. Why? Not because we're related from some family, but because, like me, this is a soul. This is an eternal being in a material body, and I know what that feels like and what a big struggle that is. And these people are struggling just like I'm struggling. And I have to be sensitive about that. And I can't be angry with them for experiencing the effects of their own past activities. I have to be I have to dig down inside myself and exercise a kind of radical compassion for people. And if you start there, I think everything else will kind of reveal itself.
That's a challenge.
Yeah.
At one point of your class, you were saying about a scientist when he's going to, expand his thought process. Said in his home, during his upbringing, it depends on the controlling power, so how it was executed. So based on that, he will expand his thought process that consciousness is a product of matter, or consciousness is something like that. So having we situated in some sort of spiritual practice, and then we also have some upbringing in our childhood and the influence of the home. So this sort of bias, what the scientist has in expanding his thought process. So is there a danger? Like now we are sort of situated in a spiritual practice, we are trying to go ahead. So is the bias existing in our case also, and then how we should be cautious of the negative effects of that bias in our spiritual practice?
If I'm understanding your question, you're asking how can we become more aware of the influence of our own upbringing in our behavior as devotees? Is that essentially what you're asking?
Yes. Will it have a bias? Like suppose a person is already grown up in a sort of spiritually aware of family, and then so will that introduce a bias in his spiritual practices in the long run? Is that okay, or should he be taking care of some things in the long run?
In moments of levity, and I'm only saying that half in levity, I say that before anyone gets initiated into Krishna consciousness, they should go see a psychiatrist. Why are you getting involved in this? Why are you doing this? What do you think you're doing? What do you think you're getting involved with? What's your purpose in getting involved in this? What do you think the goal is? What would you like the goal to be? Is that a reasonable expectation? How will what you're embarking upon alter your relationships with the people around you? What's your motive for doing this? Those aren't incidental questions. Now, that's not to deny the power of the holy names to purify. Don't get me wrong. The process works. I'm living proof of it. You know, I'm here, chanting. 70 years later, whatever. I'm still chanting. It works. But you can always learn. You should always learn more and more and more. Always question. Always question, what is the motive behind this? This is so sad. Again, we talked about this a few minutes ago, that if you're not making progress in spiritual life, you can get stuck. You can get stuck in a place because there are things that are going on that are at work inside you that you have not addressed. So you have to ask yourself, why am I not progressing? What is it? Why do I behave the way I do? Why do I have these habits that interfere with my spiritual progress? What's going on in me? And just as if you have a cavity in the tooth, you go to a dentist, you don't ask that person for transcendental realization. You just want to get the damn cavity filled. So sometimes seeing a therapist is the same thing. We have mental cavities, that need to be filled. There's no shame in speaking to a therapist, a counselor. Sometimes a senior devotee can do that too. If it's a very self-aware person, they may also offer that kind of guidance. But very often the behavioral issues that are usually some product from childhood, this is usually where it happens, need to be addressed by someone with proper training in how to navigate those waters. If it's a real problem, get it fixed.
Good morning. This has been such a beautiful class. Thank you. So many things that I would like to say, but because there's just limited time, maybe a bit of good news. This is not good news. I'm a psychotherapist, although that's good news, I guess.
Get her address.
I work particularly in addiction, and so I've been wondering whether I should mention any of this, and now I know how to frame it, I think. The good news in the world of psychotherapy is that what's in vogue currently is that there is an awareness, there is an acknowledgement, there is a social validation and a psychological validation of that transcendental push that probably needs to happen in order for a person to feel fulfilled. I was at a conference just 2 weeks ago, and there's such a movement past evidence-based therapy. Psychotherapy is for the personality. Psychotherapy is for the personality and for the mental processes that belong to the material world in a sense, or are actualized in the material sense, in the material world, excuse me. And we're at this place where people are really over and over and over again struggling to feel more of a wholeness, and we're always adjacent to, how do we get there? And in official psychotherapy conferences these days, people are talking about doing things that are transcendental to the body and to the mind. Why ketamine might be helpful, and I'm not a proponent necessarily of ketamine, but why ketamine might be helpful. It helps to sort of reset and break paradigms. Where did those paradigms come from? They came from your personality and the way you grew up, and so on and so forth. So over and over again, there's more talk about higher power and the higher power of your understanding. And so people are really starving and struggling to feel a wholeness. And spirituality has become more welcome. It's not as taboo. I've been a therapist for 28 years. I never took one religion or psychotherapy class, spirituality class in school back in those days, and rarely were continuing education courses offered throughout the years that I've been taking courses and so forth. I just did a postgraduate class at NYU on psychotherapy and spirituality, you know. So we've moved into the world where, I guess through experiential, through our experience, we know we need something. And we're acknowledging, at least in my field, that it's not necessarily something tangible that we can prove. So I'm probably rambling on and on, but I wanted to bring some of that good news.
No, that's wonderful, thank you. What's your name again?
Emily,
Emily, very nice to meet you.
nice to meet you as well.
Thank you for that good news. Yeah, I think what you're touching on there is the future of bhakti, where the centrality of spirit, I'll use that word, I don't often, but I'll use the centrality of spirit has a critical role in health and wellness, and the individual becoming a more active participant in his or her own health and wellness in fields across the spectrum. It's exciting to me. Thank you for that report. Well, that's our show. Thanks for coming. We're available for weddings and bar mitzvahs. Thank you all very much.
That's great. Yogesvara Prabhu ki
Jai.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Thank you all for your participation and questions. Now we're actually going to have Arti and Kirtan for the pleasure of Shri Sravana Mulayar Gaurachandra. So please stay. We can actually move these cushions and all come forward so we can sing and dance to the Lord. And we have His Grace Amite Prabhu here, who is going to kindly lead us in Kirtan. Hare Krishna.
Gaini Kulila Prasham Vishnupada Paramunsa Vibrajagacharya Asmutaras Suman His Divine Grace Avoid Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Vidyadila Pravishram Vishnupada Paramunsa Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Prabhupada Ki Ananda Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Namacharya Srila Thakur Haridas Ki Shri Goswami Prabhu's Ki Prem Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakti Vrinda Ki Sri Radha Krishna Rupa Gopinath Sham Kunyada Kundi Govardhan Ki Sri Vrindavan Dham Ki Sri Navadvip Mayapur Dham Ki Ganga Devi Jamuna Mai Ki Bhakti Devi Tulasi Maharani Ki Naam Sankirtan Ki Harinam Mahamantra Ki Brihat Mridanga Seva Ki Parama Purna Shri Gauri Shri Radha Madhu Varachandra Sam Vida Bhakta Vrinda Ki all glories to the Ascended
Hare Krishna.
all glories to the Ascended all glories to the Ascended all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga all glories to Sri Guru. Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
for being here for this very special Bhagavata Sravana today. This happens every week, so please come again. Next Sunday we will have His Holiness Chandramali Swami giving class, so please come for that. And we have a lot going on this next week. This is a very special week coming. It is the Hare Krishna Festival New York week. So we have on Friday from 12 to 3 p.m. in Tompkins Square Park, we have a Kirtan Festival hosted by Bhakti Center, by the Hare Krishna tree with Kirtan and Prasadam. And then there's also in Times Square that evening going to be more Kirtan. And then Saturday, June 8th will be Ratha Yatra down 5th Avenue, the biggest festival of the Hare Krishna devotees in the whole year. So please come for that. It will culminate in a huge festival in Washington Square Park. There will also be a festival on Sunday afternoon, evening at the Brooklyn Temple. And then the following weekend, June 22nd and 23rd, or maybe it's 2 weekends after actually, we are actually having a 50th anniversary of the installation of Sri Sri Radhamurli Gaurachandra on June 22nd and 23rd here all day at Bhakti Center all weekend, and that will be with His Holiness Radhanath Swami. So Krishna willing, so please come for that. We have a beautiful lunch prasadam feast served in the back for you all. Please stay, make a donation, associate with each other. Please take prasadam in the back of the temple, not in the front. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.